Drying off cows is really potentially quite a challenging time for both the farmer and the cow. A number of decisions have to be made, a number of practices need to be put in place to ensure that you optimise outcomes for the cow and in terms of production in the next lactation. So those challenges are around selecting appropriate therapies, selecting antibiotic, non-antibiotic approaches to control during the dry period, as well as actually ensuring you've got appropriate management regimes in place to minimise the risk to udder health during the non-lactating period. When it comes to drying off, our recommendation would always be to dry off abruptly, would be to actually do things to try and reduce yield prior to drying off, such as changing ration, changing groups. But we would advise against gradual drying off, as in intermittent milking. We believe it's best to take a cow right up to the point of drying off, milk her for the last time, infuse any therapies as appropriate, and then take her away from the milking environment altogether. The risks are associated, or there are risks associated with gradual drying off, increased risks of intramammary infection, and really no clear benefits to taking that approach in terms of udder health.
My inclination would be to abruptly dry cows off. Despite the fact that genetically now we have animals that are dry off, they might be producing 30, even 40 liters of milk. People are a little bit intimidating by drying off that animal suddenly. But we do have technology in terms of intramammary treatments and also management schemes to allow that. The problem with trying to gradually dry off an animal is that you only have mainly two options. Either you skip milkings, so you increase milking frequency, or the time interval between milkings, sorry, or you play with nutrition and reduce the energy inputs to the animal. Now, if you reduce milking frequency, yes, you will diminish milk production and dry off, and you'll facilitate dry off. The problem is that after calving, you're going to have higher somatic cell counts, higher degrees of intramammary infections. So that's not really an option. Nutritionally, yeah, that's a better option because you provide less energy to the animal produces less milk, you gradually dry off that animal. The catch up with that is that while you reduce energy content of the diet, the animal that's programmed to produce milk is mobilizing some of the body reserves. And it's releasing substances in the blood, such as NIFAs, that will compromise immune function. So then you're going to dry an animal that's compromised immune function and still some milk in the udder. And that, of course, is going to increase the odds of incurring intramammary infections.
Drying off, there are a lot of changes that occur both physiologically and immunologically in the mammary gland. So what we'll see when you stop milking, you see a build-up of intramammary pressure, you see back pressure, which actually stops the production of milk, reduces milk yield in the cow. And then what we see is a gradual increase in the concentrations, for instance, of lactoferrin, and increase in the somatic cell count, increase in the levels of immunoglobulins, all of which lead gradually over time to an environment that is more alien, not conducive to the growth of bacteria. So the cow actually gets herself to we could say, a quiescent state in the mid-dry period, where she's actually very resistant to new infection. That process, though, takes up to 28 days. And in the meantime, you are challenged by issues such as increased intramammary pressure. It takes time for the cow's natural defences to be acquired, formation of a keratin plug, and for milk to be resorbed from the mammary gland. So there are a lot of challenges the cow faces at that time.
Yes, I think again, studies would indicate that abrupt drying off leads to lower new case rates during the dry period, lower infections during the dry period. Some people have tried a much slower, lingering drying off technique, whereby they've maybe been milking cows once a day for a period of time and then eventually dried them off. Just seem to be less successful, do seem to get more problems.
The best way to dry off cows overall is to do it abruptly. After they're dried off, they will have their dry cow tube and a teat sealer inserted, and they need to be managed because they don't all close off at the same time and they can leak milk, so they need to be managed in a clean environment, perhaps outdoors if that's possible, to try and prevent infection from entering before they're fully dried off.
Cows probably leak milk around the time of drying off for a variety of different reasons. One would expect cows with higher yields at drying off to be more prone to leaking milk. Because by virtue of the fact that you've got higher pressures in the udder after drying off as milk continues to be produced. in the short term. But also you'd expect cows with shorter and wider street canals to be more prone to leakage. So again, that's going to be high yielding cows, it's going to be faster milking cows. Another thing that's going to be key there is whether or not there's any teat end damage. And cows with teat end damage are also more likely to leak milk after drying off.
Cows will, if they become overstocked with milk during the dry period, then they can certainly leak milk onto the beds. And there are studies from the States which show that cows dried off giving over 25 litres of milk at drying off will then have more problems with infections, new infections during the dry period. But similarly, it's also a reflection of the fact that, again, the cow hasn't made her own keratin teat plug to then form a physical barrier against infection.
I've actually been asked a couple of times by clients, by farmers, whether or not drying off's a painful process. I think it's difficult to assess pain. People's perceptions of pain are very different, but I think it'd be fair to say that it's going to be uncomfortable. You've only got to actually look at many cows, high-yielding cows after drying off, to see the level of distension of the udder, swelling of the udder, that this is undoubtedly an uncomfortable process for some cows, and that borderline between discomfort and pain, as we know as humans, is a fine line. So I think that there are issues surrounding discomfort and pain with high-yielding cows, modern dairy cows, at drying off.